not do this.
Just wait in the light.
You're right, Mike.
Rockwell and Redwood Road. Yeah. Going up the hill. Yeah, over there.
It's like, I just do as I say, not as I do, right?
Right, that's right.
Yeah, so he's working for some sort of account manager or manager for Renegade Waste Disposal. So he'll be down there. He's like 450 employees or something, direct reports. So we'll see.
It sounds
Different beast,
SPOTO,
but
okay? Can't you read SPOTO?
We're good enough? Okay. Okay, welcome to our joint Planning Commission City Council meeting tonight for Wednesday, April 30th. Always good to be with our Planning Commission friends. We appreciate your service to the community. So we'll get right in. Start with item 1.1, review of this evening's agenda. Any changes, comments, concerns? Okay, see none. Move to item 1.2, look for approval of the May 29th, 2024 joint meeting minutes.
Well, that's a long time ago.
Right? You remember that?
I'll make a motion to approve the May 29th, 2024 meeting minutes.
Okay, got a motion by Heather,
I'll second.
second by Andy. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, everybody. Okay, we'll move on to our discussion items tonight. We'll start with 2.1, review and discuss potential updates to the Harriman City regulations and policies relevant to public outreach, open houses, community meetings, and public hearing requirements for land use applications. Michael, you run a point?
Thank you. And this is a mashup of all things related to public outreach. I believe what prompted this was really the experience that we have had over the last several months relative to our efforts to engage in these property exchanges, legislative amendments, amending our general plan and zoning amendment and these MDAs. Because at one point in time, all of a sudden, I get an assignment from Wendy saying, we need to talk about the community outreach program policy. And clearly, that policy, the way the council had adopted that back in, I think, 2017, the way that we are able to implement it now is quite different, mostly because of impacts that were required by the state of Utah. So along with that conversation, there were other things that have been happening regarding our public hearing noticing, some of our administrative processes that were all about community engagement and public meetings. So I thought we could talk about all of these together. And then our general, of course, this is a work meeting, so no decisions will be made tonight. But just based on your conversation and kind of your general direction, I think we will make some policy proposals to you, to the council, in future meetings, depending on your direction tonight. So let's take a look. These are the kind of the 5 areas that we'll get through. We'll try and get through these as quickly as possible because Blake has the sexy part of the agenda tonight, a fun new economic development tool that we've been working on. And so we'll just go through these in order. This was in your packet, and again, this predated my time. Jared, you were here when this was probably adopted. I understand the former city council member really championed this. And Sandra, for a long time, has really administrated this and worked a lot with our community facilitators in the past. And this was a flow chart. This was really the only document that was attached to the resolutions that were presented to the city council when they approved this as a policy. And again, this was an effort to improve the quality of communication and facilitate input from our residents as we were doing so many subdivision reviews back then. We're still doing them, of course, but it's just not quite the same kind of fervor that we had, several years ago. In addition to subdivision reviews, of course, we would do also zoning map amendments and other kind of legislative amendments that were impacting land use in the city. Those were required to follow this process as well. And primarily what this is doing is it just simply required the developer, the applicant, to engage with the community before taking that request to the Planning Commission for a public hearing. And then, of course, legislative items are tracked to the City Council. Subdivisions, as long as I've been here, they've always been administrative with Planning Commission making the final decision. Unless, of course, and we've never done this since I've been here, if a subdivision amendment includes vacation of a public right-of-way, then that would still go to City Council. Jared, have you ever seen one of those with the City Council? They're really rare. They're really rare. But that still would require council review and approval.
This was championed by Nicole Martin.
Yeah.
She was correct me if I'm wrong, but she did the communications for Sandy at the time. They had started this during kind of their painful growth period as well.
Right.
And at the time, I and others were voicing our frustration coming from, as a community organizer coming in and saying, it's impossible for the community to get information. We feel like these decisions are just being rubber stamped when we show up to a meeting, et cetera. How can we do a better job of reaching out to the community? And this is what put in place at the time. We always need updates and things.
Right, right. Yeah, and regardless, unless it is, and I put it in the staff report, an option is maybe it's run its course and the council it's your policy, maybe you feel like it's time to rescind this policy and just rely on just the standard procedures that are currently in city code. So that was the document. Now behind this document, there are other documents that staff produced kind of as like a standard operating procedure. A lot of it was education materials for our community facilitators. What's your responsibility? What are you supposed to do? Kind of how does this work? How do you coordinate the information that's gathered through the community meeting with the city staff and thereby the Planning Commission and City Council? So there are a number of documents that potentially would require amendments based on council direction. So in this, I just kind of outlined some high-level kind of observations and recommendations. I made more recommendations in your staff report. But again, if we're going to continue this program, we definitely need to update it, primarily because the state no longer allows cities to require any kind of public meeting, community meeting, any kind of meeting before that item is presented before the Land Use Authority. And in our city, that Land Use Authority is the Planning Commission. So the state has streamlined our process, taken that ability away from us. We can still do, again, these legislative amendments, zoning. We have done general plan amendments with community meetings, because oftentimes when somebody's requesting a general plan amendment, they're also requesting a zoning amendment. Because they by our city code, our goal is to have those be in line. And if you're amending one, we're looking at amending the other. So we can still do that. And of course, as we've said, by state code, these MDAs, they're always seeking to modify our legislative tools, our zoning tools. And so by de facto, they're treated as if it's a zoning amendment. And the state says, okay, these MDAs, you're going to track them through the process that you would require for any other zoning amendment. So we have been taking MDAs to these community meetings. There's been some question on amendments to MDAs. And I think in general, we've been saying if it's a minor amendment, especially ones that are recognized by MDAs as being administrative in nature, we've not done that. If it's a significant amendment, we've done some kind of community outreach, public open house or something like that. We have taken those, just as we did on this last round of new projects. From my vantage point, I have worked with community councils in the past very successfully. Salt Lake City has, I don't remember how many, 15, 20 community councils, and I always valued their input, even when that input might be rather radical or very different from what I might recommend as a professional planner. But I always welcome people who are willing to engage in the public process. And I do find information. I receive information that I often don't discover in other ways. So I have always appreciated individuals who want to get involved. So that's been my recommendation. However, there are some concerns, and Wendy has, of course, tons of experience in our city with working with volunteer groups. And we've recently, as you all know, we've made some significant changes in what the city does, how we interact with these groups, or we no longer really have a formal relationship with some of these. They're all under kind of this newer policy. But there are unintended costs. There can be. And of course, as we're looking at budgets, we're very concerned about anything that might impact or obligate the city's budget. In my mind, I was thinking that this would be completely volunteer in kind of expanding or amending this program.
Let me clarify
Yes,
that a little
yes.
bit, Michael. My concern is volunteers are fantastic. We love volunteers, but they are not free. It's going to take some city staff, some
Yeah.
resources to help them with these programs. Sandra was running the program when it was run by volunteers, and it took a lot of time and resources. So that's my concern.
Yeah.
Is that sometimes people just think that volunteers are free. They're not. They're very valuable. They help us get a lot of things done, but there is a cost associated with the volunteer program, especially if you want it to be successful.
Yeah. So I mentioned this in the staff report, of course. The city council has stated in the past in your strategic plan that you really are looking for ways to promote trust in government, engage the community, be proactive in communications. There's hints in here, of course, of trying to find better, newer, technical ways. We have a fantastic communications team. I've worked for 6 different cities, and honestly, I don't know that I've seen better resources, better use of resources in our communications team. I think we really strive to take advantage of all the new media, and even with that, we do still struggle, right, with getting the word out, or at least having people hear us. We're putting the word out, whether or not they're hearing. So with all that said, and with what you've read or reviewed in the staff report, really we're coming down to some options. Does the city council think that maybe it's time to rescind the policy? If nothing else, we really do need to update the policy to reflect the limitations of state code. So we need to have the policy be corrected to how we can really use it, or do you want to maybe look at modifying and expanding it? Now, one of the key strategies that I stated in my report, I guess maybe I missed it, we really need to have, I said right here, suggestions in staff report, consistent and unique date and time is critical. So what I've seen in other communities is that every community council or community neighborhood, they would have a reserved night of the month. So this community council would meet on the second Tuesday of the month at 6 o'clock. Someone else would be the third Thursday of the month, whatever that is. You want to try and have only one meeting, one community meeting that's happening at the same time somewhere in the city. When we don't have that, we've never had that. What's happened is that every time we had a development request that required this step, we would contact the community facilitator, find out when they're available, contact the developer and say, okay, can you meet this timeline? Let's work together, get out notices, hold the meeting. So because it's not consistent, we've struggled with having volunteers. Who wants to hold open their schedule for whenever? You never know, right? You just don't have anybody. Now, we would have some really good volunteers. Preston was one of our volunteers, served faithfully, and even served in multiple districts, right? Because we didn't have facilitators in every district. But I don't know how many of our facilitators even had a second, because we were trying to do that, right? You'd have a trade-off. You'd have a vice. Yeah. But it was a struggle. So I think that would be ideal. If we continue this program in any form, even if it's a basic form, it would be my recommendation that we do that. And ideally, if we can find a meeting space that is in or near that district, a fire station, an elementary school, the library, you know, whatever. And obviously, if that doesn't work, then here. That's what we've always have done. I don't know, Sandra, did we ever hold one that's not in City Hall?
Yeah, they held them out at pavilions, they held them
Okay.
at clubhouses.
Yeah, that's another good example, right? An HOA clubhouse. Since I've been here, I think they've been pretty much here. Yeah. All right. So, what's your pleasure? This is where you all get to decide or talk about this and start giving us some indications as to what your thoughts are and maybe how to move forward. Oh, I did put, this was not in your staff report, and I'm not a good attorney because you should never ask a question you don't know the answer to, but is it possible to maybe just simply suspend the program, maybe for implementation at a later date, rather than rescind? I don't even know if that's really is a valuable option. But, you know, if you feel like maybe now is not the time to really do something else with this program, I wondered if that might be an option. But
What's worth, I apologize, my back's killing me. I can't sit down anymore. At least for a little bit. To follow up on kind of the introduction, all the information Mike just gave. My opinion, when we put this in place, there was so much going on. There was so much going on. There's so many projects, and not just, you know, a couple acres here, a couple acres there, like multiple. I mean, all the big projects we've been talking about, the MDAs. I mean, there was so much all the time, and the public wanted to be engaged, right? There was something happening in everybody's backyard. So this was kind of a response to try to help, one, get information to people and engage them in the process. I think it's safe to say at this point it's a completely different situation, right? This most recent one, it might be the last one that's of that size. We just finished Panorama, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. So the reason we put this in place isn't necessarily the situation isn't the situation we have now. So maybe the first question is, should we continue it? And if not, easy answer, right? And then this is a short meeting, great. If we want to continue it, but to address the current situation, what is that and what does it look like?
yeah, again, we would still take then any legislative items to the community outreach process. You know, in some ways, it was really interesting to see what we just experienced through the SWAC project, in that most of the community engagement happened through those community outreach meetings. I was really surprised to see how relatively few individuals came and spoke at our public hearings or even addressed the city council. There were still some, but I felt like we either listened to the concerns or potentially resolved some of those concerns, or at least answered them. And then I also know the council was heavily engaged in one-on-one contact with residents who were trying to reach you and expressing their concerns with the council. And so, I don't know, in some ways I almost felt validated. Like, maybe to your point, Jared, how many more of these larger projects are we really going to have? But I felt like it actually did help that process. Now, in my encouragement in keeping it, as you could see in my report, I was suggesting that I think these groups could actually be more than just simply a development review process or a step in the development review. That's what I see in other community councils who actually get people out. They're self-motivated. They're talking about concerns in their own neighborhood. They're not waiting for the city to generate an agenda. They have their own. They're creating volunteer opportunities. They're doing service projects. They're identifying concerns with community crime and want to find out, why are we having a rash of burglaries in our community, or car thefts, or, so I'm just suggesting that by doing it on a reserved night, you might see that some of these groups who have energy and interest do more. You're right, if it's just going to be just development review only, it's probably going to be basically what we've experienced, but in a more focused way, right? Reduced way.
Mike?
Oh, Brody has come in.
Yeah.
You want to go?
I was just gonna say, would it make sense to utilize Friends of Harriman for something like this?
No.
I think that maybe we're talking about, I think we're talking about two different things, because Nicole is super passionate about this, and it made so much sense. There was a lot of backlash from the public because things were going so fast, people weren't being engaged. I attended the open houses we had they were very well attended, most of them. I thought it was very advantageous to have it. Now, if you're saying the state's saying we can't require that, well, we can require it of ourselves. If we're a city, we can say if we do something, we can require it. But I think the other component of it was we also were trying to clean up some stuff before it went to the planning commission. We're trying to speed up that process, because if we can get rid of some of the real big pushback from the community before it went to planning commission, and have the developer work on that prior to that, it made that process go faster and smoother. That was definitely a component of it. And so I don't know if you notice that that's been helpful to you guys, but again, I think it's back to how many more of these are we gonna have? And can we just work with the developer and say, hey, we can't require you to do this, but could you meet with the community? And I think that your community councils is a great idea, but I think it's different than that. I think the purview of that would be different. This is more for this subdivision's coming, can you fix it?
So again, what I've witnessed, and I've done this before, is that you have these existing community councils already working on kind of their own priorities. We contact that council and say, we have a zoning amendment in your community. Mm-hmm. We need to schedule this have the developer come and meet with you, just like we've done with community facilitators. Mm-hmm. They just go to that particular community council on the date that they have available and have that same conversation. But that community facilitator has a larger kind of objective or purpose. They have more energy. They have more interest in trying to kind of have this community experience, engage their own neighborhood in the community. They're not just waiting for a development request to meet.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so it does work well. This is exactly what I've seen in other cities.
Yeah, it sounds like it would work well. I love community solving community problems rather than saying, government, will you fix this problem, right? And that's what it sounds like you're describing. But to Wendy's point, it's like, but I don't want that to be Sandra's responsibility to make sure all these community people are coordinated, because then we're just spending additional money. So how do we promote the community being involved in helping make a better community without it having to be funded by the taxpayer money by paying these guys to be there?
That's a great point, Sherry. I could see this envisioning rather than monthly, but more quarterly or biannually basis, where they're bringing those topics to community, but also as a potential political entry point to the planning and zoning, or to a council run, or to where they're actually engaged with their community and they have that pulse where you're like, oh, there's something going on in Teton Ranch. Who do I talk to? Oh, I know exactly who to go to, right? Or whoever's in that area, or even on the south end. But I think we as council members or even planning and zoning should know those people, like who knows that area, who can you relate to, like, oh, what's going on at Harriman Town Center, right? Or what's going on wherever. And it may be a neighbor, it may be somebody across the city, but I don't know if it's a set monthly thing or if it's multiple councils, if just those neighborhoods come together and they have a roundtable discussion like this, talking about their specific needs in their community. But it also goes to the commercial space, the economic development, what they want to see come in as buildings and structures that we build out, because we have this commercial space that's not getting built out yet, or not filling up as fast as we want to. They may be able to give some good ideas. I mean, we probably have a lot of that figured out, but like Sherry said, those meetings, the front end of those meetings, they were decently attended for the noticing requirements that we got. But then you look at it and you're like, 300 people out of 65,000 that could come, right? Even if you could take a third of that as actual eligible people to come and participate, that's still insignificant to what the city looks like, so. But I love the part to engage others. I just don't know if it needs to be a monthly or a bi-weekly thing or something like that.
Well, again, it's just based, again, on my experience, is that unless they have some regularity. Now, I said in the report, some communities may not have the energy. They may not have the interest. It was interesting that, yeah, some communities didn't even function their community council, even though it was recognized on paper. They didn't really have anything going on. When I would go to Sugar House, packed. Their community council was like 30 people on their board, and the whole library was full. The Avenues, it was the same way. You know, and these were fully developed neighborhoods.
It's like council
Yeah.
meetings. Sometimes you see people at all, these cities have lots of people at their council meetings. We never
Yeah.
have one.
Well, and again, that was just a community meeting, so.
Mike, one thing I was gonna add to that is, I think when people see something on the agenda for planning commission or for city council, it's like, oh no, like I missed the opportunity to actually give input before it's done, quotations. So I like the ability for people to feel engaged before things are official, so to speak. So they feel like they have a voice. I don't know. For me, I've been to planning commission, city council, and other cities too, and it's like, what is my saying something actually gonna do when it's already at this point and it almost feels done?
Yeah, there's a level of apathy,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
They think it's done, even if it's not, and they don't
Correct.
think that their voice is heard.
Like even when we're like, hey, we're the planning commission, it's gonna go to city council, most likely people are like, okay, what is that gonna do? And they become disengaged, which isn't good.
It's true.
Well, and that's the thing, our whole point was to try to get information to people and engage them in the process. If you're there waiting until like planning commission or city council meeting to start that engagement, it is,
Too late.
they're behind the eight ball, right, already, so that was the intent of this.
But even this last go-around, the people that were engaged from the beginning of the process to the end walked away last Wednesday night understanding, we're happy with it, I mean, maybe we didn't, happier.
Yeah.
And we had a conversation earlier today with one member, and it's like, that compromise, but that communication was there, and they understood the process, and they engaged. But then you have the people on Thursday morning, Facebook warriors, that were all over it, and after the news article came out, and they're like, and then the people came up, that's not how it went, that's not how it was. So the message is getting out there, but it's tough to fight those front end arguments when they didn't even participate. And so,
Perfect way to do it.
yeah.
Got an email the day after from Mr. Clay. I just spent an hour on the phone with him literally before coming in here.
Nice.
Ironically, right, this is a big part of this, you know, how would we know about this? If we're frustrated, we didn't know. Well, let me explain the process, right? And I'm open, I'm all ears. Like, I was on the front end of doing this, is why I got involved in all this. I'm open to any suggestion you have. But something, there's a limit to what we
Yeah.
can do. I can't go and knock on everyone's door and try to, you know,
Right.
force them to be engaged in the process. But I do feel it's important to give people adequate information and opportunities to engage.
The toughest thing is,
Where, like, how far can we go?
we over-notice sometimes, and so it's disheartening when you're like, I didn't know about it. Like, really? It's on the website, it's on Facebook, it's on newsletters, it's on podcasts. So I think we've done better, but we do better than most cities though too, so.
The process that we've had in the past did not create any kind of self-energy or synergy because, again, there was no regularity. Nobody could really get fully engaged and have bring their own energy to the conversation as a community leader. Because there was just, and they had nothing else to do other than respond to a development request. And so as those started to peter out, as we stopped taking subdivisions to these community facilitators, we stopped reaching out to them less, you know, because it was so infrequent, you know, on those items. So this is a mental shift, but, I stated up here, which one will likely yield the best results based on the strategic plan that the city council has stated, which you are fully able to change that plan. Which one results the best, but maybe good or better is good enough. Maybe you're feeling like, yeah, we're doing well enough without this anymore. We don't need it. We don't want it.
So for me, I lean on it's probably run its course in that we don't meet at the same volume as we have over the years. And on top of that, even throughout this time, there has been people that felt like there was occasionally a disconnect between what they heard at the community center and what they heard at planning commission. And I think as we refine and move to the future where less large development's gonna happen, it's gonna be more microcosm, I think it's time to remove it myself, because I think it would force more true open dialogue in the planning commission meeting or council meeting. And I've been there when we used to have the really long meetings, and those have drastically reduced to the long meeting now is 9, where before a long meeting was 1 o'clock in the morning. So I do think it's probably time to come back myself. And I think the community outreach you're talking about is great, and I think that's a whole different topic. But I think related to this subject, that's just my opinion. It's probably run its course, and it makes sense to reduce and focus where it makes sense to go after it. Because you're still gonna get the renegade, no matter what we do, you're gonna have the renegade Facebook stalker, Instagram, whatever, you're gonna have it. That's gonna happen no matter what. So to me, we should just embrace the suck and go for what makes sense.
Adam, you're right. This would be pivoting that program to a kind of a different focus, but what we've been doing would still happen inside that program. Okay, it would still happen there. And in fact, if you read the information, it was all about engaging the community, but you just couldn't do more with it because of the problems, the structural problems we had in the program.
And I just lean on more, if the community wants to unite, they're gonna unite individually. Like when you united, I remember you guys united. It didn't matter what we wanted to bound it as. And that's what I worry is, and the stuff you're talking about, that's when they unite. And that's what you want the community to do. And so I kind of feel like if we force it, we're gonna force what we think it should be rather than the issues related to what's going around. But again, that's just my opinion.
I have a different perspective on this from my experience in the program. I think one of the issues was the formality of it. I think for a program like this to be successful, to Adam's point, there needs to be some organic element to it. However, I disagree that disbanding it and just letting the organicness of it happen, it won't happen.
It won't.
It won't, especially with our culture. We have a very different culture here in Utah. People tend to stick to within a group that they know. And a lot of the community feel that you would get outside of Utah, you may not get that here. And so as a result, I think that you need a secular point to bring that community feel. And how you do that is to present these organic opportunities, such as a consistent meeting time. That's all a person would need. You don't want formal meetings per se, but if you have a consistent meeting time and place to enable that organic element to happen, I think that would make a huge difference. You would then get people that can show up and kind of galvanize at that point. Yeah. But it has to come from basically the city. I do think that is necessary.
So here's just playing devil's advocate. Let's say some of you are right, like, it's run its course. We really don't have people who have energy or interest in this. Then, Wendy, we won't have a budget impact. It said it won't have a budget impact if nothing's happening. Okay? But if it takes off, then it's meeting a need, and isn't that something that we want? And I have found in my career that things that are worth caring about require maintenance. It requires some investment, right? But if it doesn't work, then it won't have a cost. It won't cost me time to go do stuff. And by the way, I'm exempt, so you can just keep me working.
But there is a limit to what you can expect your exempt staff to do. There is a point where you do not have the people. That's my fear with this, is that we don't have enough staff to make it success. It'll be one of these flash in the pans. We'll be successful and then it'll fall off. We'll look worse than if we didn't even try. I just don't, we do not have, we have 3 planners, or 4 planners, counting Mike. That's it. We have 1 person full-time in economic development. We just don't have the bodies to support 5 different or 10 different community, we just don't. I think we would we would fail.
So Nathan, to that aspect, and I think that we are past that critical point of mass development where we're doing a lot of these MDAs, a lot of this rezoning, general plan, and where this was a critical issue, where I'd say, okay, if we don't have a program like this, we'd have a major impact of the outfall from it if we didn't do and keep a pulse on the community. But I think at this point, we have grown or tripled since this was created. I think we've got a good pulse on the community and we know where we're at and where our build out is, that maybe it has ran our course, but I don't think any political outfall or organization, we're gonna be really quick to respond to that and see them engage and galvanize, that's a great word, and come together, that we can pinpoint and focus what their needs are. And we'll be able to see that coming from a while, I believe.
Well, I should state, I'm not opposed to doing something. I want to be careful that we don't overcommit and then it looks worse than being incremental about something. That's my fear.
I think that, like, if we have some changes in Olympia and we have a big HRTZ, elemental P, whatever, all the next acronyms are up there, then I think that as a city, we need to be more active in making sure that we have more outreach on, when we see big things like that we think are really gonna impact, like we did with the land swap. I think that even if this wasn't in place, I think that was incumbent upon us to do that, just to help just for transparency's sake. But I don't think it needs to be a requirement for each thing. And I love the idea, but then I also love a lot of the things we have on the capital improvement plans that aren't getting done either because, we have no money. So all the great ideas, but when you don't have the money to fund them, then they have to just go in the great idea bucket until you have enough money to come back around to fund it, it seems like.
And Mike, I would say that's where I'm at. I think, to Adam's point, I think this program as is run its course. I think it's run its course. I think we can bring stuff back if we have certain developments to the, if we do the HDRZ out there. I think that, and I want to get this in place. I love, you and I have been talking about this for years, this concept. I want to get it in place at some point, but I think we're tapped out right now. I think staff were tapped out. I worry about that. Down the road, maybe we're in a better place staff-wise. But then John and I have also been considering doing, we started doing those I think those are an opportunity. We kind of let those fall off this year, we were busy, right? We were just busy. But I think re-engaging those in each council district is a start to this. I want to work towards this, I guess is what I'm saying, but I think this program as is kind of run its course. But I love, I've told you I love this. I want to get in there, but I think it's financially, it's just a challenge right now with staff.
Yeah. So is the council of a mind of providing direction right now, or do you feel like you want to give direction in a future maybe work meeting?
See a bunch of people out.
Any other planning commissioners have plans?
I'm indifferent, to be honest. I mean, I can see it both ways.
Well, you're a representative of the community.
Yeah. No, I know. No, that's true. But no, we definitely want to have the public input. We got to find out the best way to do that. If we can get people to come, because you're right, nobody comes to the planning commission. Maybe that is because this has been so successful. But maybe not. Maybe they don't come anyway. But we do need to get the word out. We do need to get the public engaged. But I agree. Maybe this isn't the right way to do it.
I tell everybody, we've talked about this a little bit. We're almost 2 cities now. I think we're almost 2. We've got this whole new side.
Almost 3.
None of us are from council on that side, right?
Yeah.
A lot of them, when you talk to them, they don't realize that we have a Crane Park. a lot of them have never come to City Hall. Like, they don't know, they don't come this way at all. We live in this bubble because we come here, right? We know about this stuff. We're in this bubble.
Yeah.
There's this whole other area that we're not engaging in the community, and I get it, right? That's,
Well, some of the community doesn't even know that Riverton's out of River, like, there's areas that aren't the city, that's Riverton. And so,
They don't know which city they're
yeah,
in.
which is really tough.
So, I mean, I think we're all in agreement that this program as it is run its course. Like I said, I think the scope, the purpose of it was because there was so much development that was affecting everybody. We needed a way to inform the public and help them be engaged, but it was all development related. That part of it has run its course. What you're talking about is shifting to something else, which is still important, which is trying to still engage the community, right? If we're gonna have a sense of community and have people involved and whatnot, I think that something like this is important to do. What the scope is, how it's organized, et cetera, is a lot more work than this meeting, in my opinion. I agree with you that if you can give a basic structure, right, to allow that organic part to happen, right, that's the best way to go about it. There's very few crazy people like me or a handful of others who take their own, go to their own time and expense to organize a bunch of people, right, for whatever the purposes are. Most people aren't going to be bothered to spend any time, let alone money and sacrifice, et cetera, unless there's something immediate in their backyard. But there are people, so the conversation I had with this guy today was, people aren't, people don't know how to be involved. How many times we hear that? They don't know how to volunteer. They don't know how to get information. They don't know. And then to tell them, well, come to a formal meeting up there, right, and stand at that microphone, that's so intimidating for people, let alone if they can carve it out of their schedule to get there. But a meeting in a room like this at the fire station with, people wearing not suits. So I totally agree with this run its course. I totally agree that something else is needed to foster engagement with the community and have that. I don't know what any of the answers are, how to go about it.
Yeah. I'll tell you, I went to my own planning commission and spoke. I was nervous. I do this for a job. And I'm like, yeah, that was crazy. All right, I think I'm hearing is you're interested in just rescinding the policy. I assume, Nathan, we need a resolution to do that? Do we have the council adopt a resolution to rescind the policy?
I think what we would do is we'd come back and talk, if we really talk about rescinding it or just revamping it heavily.
Okay.
I think there's value to what we're doing. As I said, my comments are more like if we wanted to go all in on the community council, I just don't think we are positioned to do that now. It would have to be much.
Yeah, that's why I thought maybe suspend it if we're just not maybe staffed for that, but.
We need to modify it to meet state law, but that's probably a conversation that maybe at a work meeting with council, say, here's the stuff that bring in line with state law. And because we use this process as well for like our parks, we've done that.
And we're going to talk about that here in a minute too.
So my recommendation is to write to council with, here's the state law required changes. If you want to rescind it or amend it, we can talk more then.
Okay.
Everything else is suspended, but we keep it in the back of our mind how to move
Okay.
forward.
All right.
I think we all like the concept, just we may be early.
I'm supposed to be the boring part of the agenda. And we're taking up too much time on this. Okay, let's see if we can get through the rest of this a little faster. So public hearing notice requirements. We all are familiar that when we've had a public hearing, we always send out a notice at least 300 feet. Sometimes we do a little more. So 300 feet to residents and property owners. The state has recently changed its regulations saying that cities can now determine what that radius should be. It's not a hard 300 feet. However, it also refers to what has the city adopted in the past, including policy documents. So we do have policy documents that say 300 feet, even though our current city code doesn't say 300 feet. We've been relying on the state code in the past, and now that the state has pulled that 300 feet out, we've been relying on the Planning Commission, rules of procedure, and there's a couple of other policies that refer to the 300-foot rule. So there's an opportunity to reduce that standard. We could potentially increase the standard, but of course that means we're spending more money on public notices. Another thing, I think the commission and council knows that a couple of years ago, the state also said that we no longer have to have public hearings for subdivisions. We still do, but that's on the table. If the council doesn't want to have public hearings for subdivisions, and thereby what some cities have done, if they're no longer doing public hearings for a subdivision, the state also says you could have staff just simply administrate the subdivision ordinance as a technical review. And there is no public notice, there is no planning commission meeting. It's just all a technical process by the city staff. So again, at the bottom, I've said, if we remove the hearing requirements for subdivisions, if we reduce the radius for other legislative matters, obviously the end result is we will also reduce awareness and participation. Is there any interest in changing our 300-foot rule right now for just notices in general? And maybe potentially modifying what we do with subdivisions. Now, there's another topic that's called the administrative referral policy where we're going to talk more about subdivisions and public hearings. But any kind of questions on this or any fast and hard feelings?
I don't. I think we just talked about how important it is to let people know. So I feel, I don't like the idea of taking away notice to people. Because even if it's a subdivision, it's nice to know if it's going to go up in your backyard.
Yeah.
This is where these public or the community groups kind of come in handy. When I was in Ogden, even though it wasn't, so we would do a 300-foot notice, but we'd also always include the community chair for that neighborhood. And it's a lot easier to ignore a postcard from the city than it is, somebody that puts it on Facebook. Hey, there's a subdivision going on. Let's be aware of it. So anyways, it's just something to keep in mind in terms of awareness.
Yeah.
I feel like with subdivisions, we've seen people come in and tell us stuff we didn't know.
Yeah, that was my question for the planning commission. When we have those public hearings and people come in, is it productive, right, to hear their concerns and feedback or other things that you've been able to, is it productive? Or does it just result in the subdivision? It is all just a technical review. There's nothing that we can really.
There's a little bit of both. There's a little bit of both. And sometimes they want us to stop it. We all know you can't stop stuff. Like, there's the good questions you get, and those are good, but there are the, don't understand, I don't want anything but the field behind my house. Like that, but we all know that's not what our role is. So I would say it's good. I would actually, personally, I would increase it if you were to do anything, because 300 feet can make it where it skips the cul-de-sac that it's affecting, but it affects the whole community. Yeah. And that's where I've often seen we get more people actually angry, is because they didn't get notified, meaning their neighbors talk to them and like, well, I didn't get notified. And that's where I've seen that anger comes into the equation more than anything else.
How about we just use ward boundaries?
I think the challenge is what.
There's always the person who's
the next
whatever
thing, yep.
Whatever line it is.
And I get that. I just mean 300 because of some of our areas. If you have a 100-foot lot and the right of way and 100 feet, it does make it that if you weren't directly next to it, you could be missed. That's the only reason I would say a little bit over 300.
I got involved and did what I did with making copies. Spent $500 on money, made a couple thousand copies and distributed it. I went across the street to my neighbor who has his own construction company with the card that I got and said, "What do you know about this?" Like, I didn't get one of those. Literally across the street from me, it was only those that bordered it because they were just past that
I'm just going off mine, because our lots are about 100 feet, and we have a trail behind us, and road right-of-ways. I'm just saying 300 magically does get there pretty. I wouldn't craze it too much, but 300 is just a tad on the low side, in my opinion.
This may be a topic where it's kind of like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I mean, I usually, other than what, like Nathan said, there's always somebody who's just beyond who didn't get a notice. But in general, this is a pretty common kind of expectation in our culture. Send out a notice. It does start reaching at least some people, and then they might share it with someone else. And state obviously gives us the ability to still do this. It's just, did we want to maybe codify it or do something different?
Well, I would say when we do get people attending for a neighborhood, it's usually one of the smaller neighborhoods because it's in their backyard. That's, like the one I remember was the Christmas Lane one. We had a bunch of people show up for that one because it was in their backyard. It wasn't a big development. I think it ended up being 10 houses instead of 11, but it was helpful to get their information.
Unless the city council feels so inspired at a later date, I'm going to suggest that maybe it feels like we're just going to maintain the status quo for right now. Okay.
So we are limited by state law to one hearing.
Yes, yes.
You may only have one hearing.
And we've been talking about that with the council. You only advertise the first one. And it used to be, if you continued it, you had to advertise the date certain. You had to state it. You don't have to do that anymore, like we did in our last one.
But you have a time frame in which you must approve it.
Yeah,
So
yes.
Your ability to continue it is limited by state
Right.
law. You really can't.
Not on legislative, but on subdivisions.
On subdivision,
yes. Yep.
I think that's where, anything with the subdivision, because that's usually what draws people out is what's happening behind you.
Yeah.
We now have some very strict timelines from the state.
All right, so the Planning Commission Administrative Referral Policy, we've updated this recently, so both commission and council are familiar with this. When I was hired, there were a couple of documents that were like, just kind of less formal, but they were things that the commission had previously directed staff to do. So staff wasn't doing anything that the commission hadn't already directed. And this is a policy that's in the city code. So it's not something that we're just, being creative with. It's right in the code. In updating this policy and formalizing it, which was approved by the city council, we also had introduced some ideas of taking some of these smaller subdivisions that the commission felt like maybe those things could be administrative. Well, I must admit, I didn't really think through this, but the ordinance says you still have to have a public hearing on those. And then in having a public hearing, the ordinance also says that the city manager has to appoint a hearing officer. Now, in my experience, and I've worked with these in the past, usually it's a zoning administrator or the planning manager or something like that. It's a staff person. And my team, as we started thinking about following the commission's referral policy, we quickly realized this isn't saving us any time. It's not saving us any money. Now, if we were a city that was having one commission meeting a month, maybe. But we typically have 2 a month. So we're pretty accommodating with the timeline that our development partners typically are expecting or wanting. So it's been, if we're still going to require public hearings on some of these simple subdivision, like subdivision amendments or different things, it's going to be my direction that we still bring those to Planning Commission, even though the commission's authorized to do that administratively. It's a burden. It's more of a burden than a help.
Well, there goes 3 minutes of my time.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. So I just want to let you be aware of that. So unless we wanted to do something different here, and Nathan, we don't need a hearing officer if we're not doing an administrative review on something that doesn't have a public hearing notice. So I don't know if you want to do that just for a formality in case we do, but any kind of questions about that, or you want to move this in a different direction than what I've already kind of described?
I would say it makes sense and makes sense. And when we approve them, there's usually nobody there to make any comment on it, and it's 3 minutes and
We were
done.
just trying
So
to.
you're saying that maybe get rid of the public hearing requirements for those administrative subdivision items?
Not just leave it as is and have it
Okay.
come through us.
Yeah, I don't
Okay.
think we can get rid of that, but we were trying to get rid of it.
Clint, you're,
This is a question that we should have asked you before, but would this give us the ability to have a consent agenda? Or if we have a
it's not in here, but it's a possibility. We'll have to work with our attorney's office on, or maybe we have to recognize that in either the planning commission policy that would be reviewed by the council, or maybe we codify. Nathan, I've not had a planning commission that's had a consent agenda. Have you, Clint? Ogden had one, okay.
I've never seen one.
Yeah,
There's a lot of these subdivisions that nobody shows up for. We'd still want the staff reports. A lot of times we would do a presentation just because we haven't been, gotten information. But say you had 3 or 4 subdivisions, we'd just say, anybody here to talk about this? No? Okay. Here's the
Well-
consent agenda, vote, and move on your way.
Was that like RDA stuff or?
It's just mostly subdivisions,
yeah,
administrative stuff.
okay. We can explore that and bring that under, with the advice and consent of the commission, unless the council feels strongly on that. Okay, any other kind of thoughts on this? Next one is the city council park amenities policy. In my mind, I felt like that sometimes we've had some issues as far as like determining what's the better or best kind of outreach process. Is it an open house? Is it the community meeting? Do we do both? Felt like maybe that policy could use a little more clarification. This is a city council policy. Or maybe it's just maybe updating our standard operating procedure for staff and clarifying what we do. But obviously, if we're not going to have the community meeting, then that helps simplify it. And then we would probably just rely on kind of what we've done in the past, right, Wendy, with just open houses when needed, when warranted. Maybe, so
This one's so difficult for me because it's public input and engagement. When it comes to parks in particular, everybody wants their thing.
yeah,
We don't have money for all of
Yeah.
that stuff. I almost feel like, at least recently, this has caused more problems than anything.
Yeah.
Because it's given people false expectations.
yeah. Yeah, and that was the first line, public park amenities impact the city budget. And the council is responsible for that budget.
Frustrated because they go to this meeting, we talk about all this great stuff, and then, well, we can't do it. Well, then why did you
Yeah.
talk to us about things we
Yeah.
can't do?
Yeah, I think we should put a moratorium on this one specifically until we have that complete master parks plan that we discussed. And so even if we had something come up that followed into this policy, that we push pause until we formulate and see where we are on our parks and our budget and our CIPs.
And Wendy and I had talked briefly about that. And I had suggested, maybe the administration or the parks director can maybe use their best judgment, as projects are coming up in the meantime. But I don't know if that maybe that puts us in an uncomfortable position if we do something and council's not happy with it,
Yeah, I'd hate that to be a staff position, a staff recommendation
Yeah.
there. But, I mean, I don't know. I mean, we want to empower them to make the choices and decisions, but something where it's affecting the budget or going through this process.
The one concern that I think I have with not taking it away, but suspending it, doing a moratorium, is I think part of this process is important for trails. If we're putting a new asphalt trail in an existing neighborhood, for example, we
Yeah.
would want the neighborhood to know about that and to get their feedback, right? So I think it is a kind of a case-by-case basis.
If it's in a budgeted item already, moving forward, I probably wouldn't have an issue with that.
I think one of the things we would, if you're going to seek input on what's in the park, it can't be tell me what you want without any constraint. You have to really go through that process that if you pick this amenity, there are no other amenities. It's not, here are the top 5 amenities which take our $1 million park project to an $8 million park. It's just not, I think if we're going to use it, because I think there's some value to doing it, we just have to constrain those conversations a little bit more with, if you do this, you're giving these up so that they can make a more informed decision instead of just listening to a landscape architect and drawing every little cool thing everybody wants, and then we get the estimate, and it's like, we can never build this park. I think that's where a lot of frustration comes from.
That last one in January, February, whenever it was, you were there, when we had Anthony presented that open house of the public's parks.
Oh, the playground replacements,
For
yeah.
all the all the redoing it, so that was kind of cool, because there was still a B or CD of like, and kind of where they placed those parameters around.
Grass
meetings
or
ago.
no grass?
Grass. What kind of grass?
Natural grass or low grass?
A couple meetings back in our zoning meetings, we did have a lot of public input, and from their perspective, it was centered mostly around the park issue. Okay, from our perspective, it was whatever it was, change number 7 to the MDA. But the city messaged to the public when we accepted that MDA that here's the amenities that are going in this development. And then the developer came in because of the language within the MDA and proposed changes. Most of them the public didn't care about, but when it came to that park, they were deeply concerned that from talking to them after the meeting, it felt like a bait and switch. The city approved this MDA and they approved this park, but now in amendment number 7 or whatever it was again, you're shrinking the park down to here, and we've already bought our lots and we've done all this improvements, thinking that this big of a park was going in. So somehow, I don't know if did we fail on messaging that until the meeting itself, when you've already had all these conversations with the developer and with the city, and now the public's getting involved. Sometimes I think we don't get the message out there early enough, or we're allowing the MDAs to be modified too much from what the original intent was. I think the public is perceiving that quite a bit.
What's the original intent? I'm the only one who's here when that was done, and that was never gonna be a park.
Yeah, we get the fire station and all, we understand that, but John Smith out there in the highways and byways, he doesn't understand that. Although Blake did a good job of explaining all that, but the public still didn't like the idea. They've already bought homes.
Yeah, they sold them apart.
Sorry, it's kind of us beyond the point of this, what by the intent.
It's the next slide, actually, so.
Right, so in some of those cases, you're putting something in that you need their input on, or you need volunteers, absolutely. Are we having these meetings every time we're finishing a park that's part of it, that's already dictated what it is, or where, maybe I'm missing the point of doing it? Is it just because it's on a list somewhere?
We have been doing those,
Just because we're supposed to do a meeting, so let's go have a meeting and people can come
well,
to us?
just because the policy tells us
Yeah.
to.
Yeah, the people that show up say, well, I want this and I want that, and I'm like, okay, and then we go back and say, well, we can't do those things, well, then why did you have it?
Yeah.
I just feel like it kind of does more harm
Yeah.
than good almost.
Yeah.
I think once the council makes a decision on your community outreach program, then we will we'll propose an update on the parks amenities policy. But I think that's got to be the first direction that the council gives us. Yes, yeah. And that will help, but that's going to be next year before we have that? Okay. No. We're starting the parks update. Oh, it's going to get done 2025? Okay,
We can
okay.
put out a really pretty master
Yeah.
plan, and the budget doesn't coincide with the pretty master plan either. So we have to be very careful as we put out this great master plan of parks. Everyone has, again, this expectation is what's coming. And it's like, that may or may not really truly be what's coming, so we just have to be very careful messaging
Yeah,
that kind of stuff.
and I think that's come with the change in administration in setting our expectations as staff and saying that's not real. We're not- You can't do
Well,
that.
if you have 250 million or 350 million dollars in projects and 25 million dollars, I
What's
mean,
the problem? Just a zero.
well, it's
Just
a math
zero.
problem, but just this, yeah.
So this may be going on a different topic, but why not maintain those plans for the future and future development of those parks and things, instead of just saying, well, we don't have money for the parks anymore, so let's just start getting
Yeah.
rid of them.
And that's what we've gone to, more of a
Right.
phased approach to our
Yeah.
parks. So if we can't build that
But
white
by
barn
keeping
pavilion right now.
those spaces, reserved for future
Sure.
parks and
Yeah.
things like that, I think that's gonna be super
Yeah.
valuable, especially
And
for,
to be honest, we're almost done.
right.
We don't have many
So-
major parks left. They're just
Right.
really, really expensive.
Right. No, I understand, but communities change. We're not looking at like a 5-year, hey, we have to have all of our parks done in 5 years because that's when we're built out. A lot of parks and big parks, as cities emerge and they develop and they change over time, you're gonna have the ability to do those types of parks. You're gonna have financing and other things.
It said preservation, because it's not like you're
Yeah.
gonna be like, hey, we're gonna take 10 houses out to get a park.
Well, it's better than
now that we have
saying,
density.
well, we're just gonna fill in everywhere because we don't have enough money for parks. And then you're stuck, well, it's residential. You're not gonna go back and buy those lots back and try
No, I
and
don't think
create
we're giving up
parks.
any land for parks or MDA, all that green
Yeah.
space is locked in. It's just this last one was an exchange of that green space.
Yeah.
Right.
So-
There has been a discussion about trying to get more usable space and
Right.
not just
Yeah.
counting their park strips as open space,
Right.
Yeah.
which is useless
Right.
over time.
Which isn't an open space.
Like at the end of 7300, for that subdivision up there, because we required open space, it's the side Sagebrush Hill like this, right? It's like it's completely unusable, so it's like, so if we were to convert that and put that into residential, it's not because we're getting rid of open space, it's because it's ridiculous, there's no value to it as it sits like that. And so if we can swap, and like this last swap, we got a very contiguous flat piece of property that we can make a massive park out of for real usable open space versus little pocket parks everywhere.
Yeah.
This recent experience that we've all been through was not an outgrowth of, let's get rid of park space because we can't afford to develop it. It was really, we want to make sure that we are getting more usable
Yeah,
property for the future. It wasn't a result of that. So
I agree.
you don't have to worry
Right,
about that for us.
That was
So-
a sentiment that was actually
Yeah.
discussed during the meeting, was that, yes, we can't afford to do park space.
Yeah,
so
but that
we are
didn't,
going
that
to
didn't
combine
push
it
the
and-
trade. It was to get better property.
They wanted both, do both.
Yeah.
Sure,
yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
No, that's totally
Yeah.
understandable.
But we also,
Yeah.
on this bigger space, we can bring in outside money, county money, and they'll actually fund
Yeah.
the majority
Sure.
of it.
Yeah.
You're, for sure, we don't want to
Okay.
take
No,
Thank you.
open space and turn it into houses. I agree 100%.
You,
Okay, 2.2, discussion to amend Heroin City Code Section 10-12 regarding requirements to add a new commercial flex zone. Blake, you have 5 minutes.
Gotta separate you two.
Blake can talk a lot.
Okay, so I talked to the council about this a couple weeks ago, but we haven't really talked to the planning commission. We were approached by a couple of development partners and talked to us a little bit about potential of creating a new zone. So the use didn't fit into C2 that they were looking at. So this is a map showing where our commercial uses are. There are a couple pieces missing. Out here in the middle of nowhere, there's a couple of blue pieces on our zoning map that are RC, resort community. But, so they're city-owned property right now, that's stuff that was bought with the ACA funding. So that's one that we'll kind of ignore as we go through here. It doesn't exist anywhere in the city except for, but these are all the
zones that we have where residential or commercial use is allowed. And then we have our general plan. And so the commercial uses, it's kind of hard to read, but they reside over in here. We don't see the RC. The RC is actually in the FR 2.5 and FR 5 areas where it's allowed. But this just shows that we allow it in allow those uses in those certain land use designations, and we generally follow. So every time we've had to change stuff, it's had to have a general plan and a rezone. But these are some of the key pieces that we have zoned as C2 or M1, M2 that haven't developed yet. And we're trying to figure out why haven't these developed? Is this the right use for them? And these are some of the limiting factors. My favorite one is owner. We have a few owners that just are sitting on property not willing to sell. But these ones are pretty important and what we'll be focusing on tonight: the topography, the visibility, the accessibility. And then obviously the zoning, just the uses that are allowed in that zone, and does it make sense? So it's a really slow progress. So is there a uses gap in our zoning code? So I kind of created this little spectrum on the bottom. We have neighborhood-centric, retail-focused on this side, regional-focused, and manufacturing on this side. And as I kind of worked through and saw, we only have like one area that's NU. It's a trucking company over next to 5600 West. And then we have a lot of NU2 in the city, town center. We're sitting in NU2 right now. And then we kind of have a gap here between these commercial neighborhood-centric areas that we go out to our technology manufacturing and our manufacturing zones. So is there a use that would fill that gap, and is there a purpose to fill that gap with a zone to allow those uses? So the development partners we've been talking with, they've been looking at doing some flex shops, mini micro flex they call it, where you have a retail front and then maybe some warehousing in the back. And so the warehousing and the wholesale isn't allowed in the C2 zone. But general retail and things like that are. And you could kind of mix those and do that in a new zone where you do one or the other now. Or you go to the M1 zone and do it, but you're out in the south end of town. Some of the risks with this, if you have someone in here that's running like a contractor business and they show up to work and then they take off for the day, you might have a dark storefront during the whole day and not a lot of traffic coming in and out, so it almost looks like an abandoned building. So that's one risk. And then you can have a lot of delivery truck traffic coming in and out of the back. The other space we're talking about is makerspace. Makerspace is kind of a place to get maybe home occupations into the next step if they're growing and they want to move into an area that's not in their house. You can get multiple business owners in here together that can collaborate. One of the uses we've talked about is there's a clubhouse in the front of these spaces where they can use it to have meetings, so they don't have to have this conference room or this extra space that they're paying for. So a lot of this is to get the uses to move up to the next step, but not cost a fortune for them to do so. Moving into a large flex space unit like we have down at Porter Rockwell. And then some of the risks here, similar risks with the other one. A lot of times these might be fenced off and gated off, so limited access to the public. And then CC&Rs are very important to manage these facilities, so the city doesn't really want to go in and do a bunch of code enforcement on the back side of these units and make sure there's things aren't getting stored outside and things like that.
They don't have to be closed off, though. You're just saying that's...
They don't have to be.
Yeah.
It's pretty common, though, is what we're seeing is talking with them. And then one potential idea, and I'll show a site here in a second of how this lays out, is maybe accessory uses, small storage units that would be accessory to the makerspace. So if they have some materials they need to store and they don't have enough space inside, they can have a garage out back that they can store materials to go get. Or if the site's large enough, topography fits, maybe a storage unit is a good fit to take up a corner parcel. They don't generate a lot of traffic, but they can take up the space, so. And we're proposing this only as maybe being considered as an accessory use to the other uses. It wouldn't stand alone on the site. So in the packet, I had a sample code, just some kind of a bullet list or an outline of what the code could be. We had some uses we were considering in that. These are ideas that we'd come up with our existing table of uses, and then maybe conditional or accessory use could be this warehouse or self-storage. These other uses we've kind of put over here, they don't exist in the code anywhere currently, so it's also something to consider is maybe creating and defining a couple of new uses. We've always done these storage units as warehouses. And what's interesting is the C1 zone, there's only, I think, 3 areas designated, maybe 4 as C1 in the city, and 2 of them have storage units in them, which aren't allowed anymore. But when I started working here, the C1 zone was the more intense, or the storage units were allowed, and then we switched it, so they're legal non-conforming lots right now. So this is one to think about, we'll talk about at the end here, or unless anybody wants to jump up and maybe has some thoughts while we're on the uses right now. Sandra's here to take great notes, I hope.
Why data centers?
Why data centers? I don't know.
Data centers honestly are they're pretty industrial, like really. So I just, data centers usually are, they usually are more of an industrial focus, and then they just get bigger. So I just would worry if it started as a data center, it will keep growing and the whole building will become a data center. So I would just say if that's the intent, it might be its own zone within itself.
So, I think,
Hypothetically.
I don't think there's any huge.
Or like limited, like how big it can go, like.
What the issue is you won't. You'll run out of power. You don't. They are a huge cash flow. They will come in and get their way. I promise.
What about limits to vehicle repair? Like, I see limited, but like what would be allowed?
So when we've talked, they didn't really want to do paint booth or like
Body shop.
Auto body. So you might have a hobby mechanic that fixes a couple cars a week or something, but not like a full repair shop. And I can't remember the definition with limited in the code.
It's just general services like tires, oil changes, engine repair. It's not, it excludes body work or vending body work.
One of the real necessary keys is obviously to allow the right mix of uses, and we're not creating kind of a negative impact, right? We want to make sure that the spaces are small enough that they're affordable, right? And we've got to pay attention to the materials to keep those costs down. Yeah.
I was gonna say, most of this looks like it'd be tilt-up, very similar to what's there on 126th.
Yeah, that's what we'll get into in the next couple slides here is design standards and materials and construction methods.
Which is what we need to go to, and I'm not against it. I think there's a place for it. And I think a lot of these are services that I think we could use here.
So I've personally visited a couple of these sites in Arizona and Texas and Colorado. They are amazing incubator spaces.
Yeah.
And I do like the part where it's in conjunction accessory as a storage unit place as well. So that will limit, say, my contracting business, renting out 2 or 3 10x10s and rent a space down the street, right? That I vacate that so homeowners have that access now, and I can actually operate my business out of an actual office conference room. And a lot of them are pre-tilt-ups or tilt-up manufactured buildings, second story sometimes. But some have architectural features too, canopies, awnings, like that one storefront where it's a step storefront, stuff like that. So I think those are great ideas.
I think these are awesome. I think we just need to limit what they can store outside, because I've seen some of these down in American Fork where that becomes the issue, is they squat the parking lot, and that's the look that changes the whole atmosphere.
Or they have 10 trailers where they drag them in. And
Correct.
And our discussion has been no outdoor storage. That's why you have the storefront, the storage area in the back for your equipment, and then maybe the storage unit on the other back for your materials.
I think that's why the storage actually is more functional too, because it's like you can say, no, you can't do that, but there's additional space
Yeah.
where you
And
could
it's
store.
rentable.
Yeah, and it's rentable.
So we have a couple of sites we were thinking about. This one is where the Whitestone Church has been planned. It's kind of it's zone C1. It fits C1 really well because it's embedded kind of in a neighborhood. It's along 126 though, but it does have some challenges with accessibility, a little odd shaped. So churches fit well, but other retail stuff are a little hard. And then site 2 are the areas down. One area is behind Redemption. It's bound by Mountain View Corridor, Academy Parkway. It's got walls on both sides. It's back behind. So it has a few of these limiters here that kind of support this extra use. Site 2 is the one I'm going to focus on. We kind of did a mock-up of the site, what could be there, and it's probably never going to be very successful as a retail shopping center. It's hard to get to, it's hard to see, but it could be successful as an incubator space. So here's the site. Got the plan view here. This is Redemption Bar. So the access for this site is past Redemption and down this road to the back. And then you can see the concept with the storage unit in the back corner. It would be back against 2 major roadways away from the residences. If you stood anywhere around on the adjacent property, the perceived elevation would be much lower because this is going to be built way down low. And then this blue area blue square is the common space where they can have their conference meetings and maybe have a company party there or something. And then you have the units here and then the smaller storage units that support the uses in the incubator space, the maker space. So that's kind of the concept that has been laid out for this site. We didn't lay one out for the Whitestone Church property, but it would be similar to these, maybe along the back, and then some of the storefronts on the front where the storefront would look like a retail shop on the street.
Do you foresee the corner off of Porter, Rockwell, and Redwood, that commercial, getting pressured to go this route?
No, I actually just met with a group last week, and we're looking at doing something there that would be retail commercial.
So when you laid this out, is this for like a developer to look at, or because the city's gonna push forward with this?
Developers looking at doing this. So this is their layout, their plan, but it made a lot of sense. When we started looking at it, going, oh yeah, this makes sense, that makes sense. And so now it's kind of asking everybody, is this something the city wants to do? We think there is a gap in the code. Is it something we want to do? What uses do we want to allow there? What's the best way to promote this, but also limit it so it doesn't get away from us?
These are concepts I have been talking about with developers for years since I've come here. And we finally have a couple of potential partners who are interested in it as well. And I think it fits a need in our community.
Hey, Sandra, how many home-based businesses? 1,000-something. How many? Over 1,200. So this would be perfect even for our own community.
Currently, when they're growing, they're leaving.
They leave
They're going to another
because there's no place for them to go.
And the purpose of this is to be a mini. They aren't ready to go into your big locations like DBAT. They are looking for these smaller, flex, mini.
Next step.
What would be the requirement to provide a mix of these uses on the site? So if we say in the CF zone, you can do storage units, what if somebody just comes in and says, okay, you give me, it's conditional use, which we know is very hard to say no to. We're going to do the whole site in conditional use.
It'd be accessory though.
They'd have to own a business.
They'd have to have a primary use on the site, and that would be accessory.
Yeah, and we've been talking about this. We'll have to write some kind of metric, right?
Yeah.
That has a proportional relationship. Yeah.
It's just to kind of make sure that we do get a mix of uses and it's not all just, storage units, because that's the easiest and.
Yeah.
That's a concern we're definitely going to
Yeah.
Well, that's why they have the phase 2 there. I think what you'll see is that main structure building where they can operate and business in, and then the units will come in as needed for their auxiliary accessory uses to those businesses on site.
Could I add another aspect to the uses? I would think, are there any uses that would not be permitted? Because you always get the dance troupe that tries to come in here, and then the moms complain when they can't drive in and out.
Yeah, so there, you'd have to, yeah.
The one we did talk about was auto paint booths and like body repair shops.
Right, but what about the dance troupe?
But the dance stuff, yeah, you'd probably want to.
Is there a way to, just high occupancy groups can be disqualified from being, or is, I don't know if there's a way to you know, because you get the dance troupe, and then all of a sudden you get, 20 moms coming in on the hour trying to get their kids.
Yeah, there's no parking or circulation.
Right,
set up
exactly,
for that type of
exactly. And that's why I was saying, is that something that can be,
Tied to the volume almost of the business
Right.
kind of thing.
Like I've seen baseball facilities kind of work out of some of these spaces too, but they're typically bigger than 1,000 square feet. They're like
Or
2,000
there's
to
parking.
3,000. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, 1,000 to 1,500 square feet limits it to, I mean, you might get like,
I don't think these would be big enough for instructional things.
you can get some of the little dance studios or.
They'll have some sort of conference room, but I don't know how, I've never seen them large enough to hold something like that, but you never know, people will do crazy things.
It's like personal.
that's why
So I'm
we
probably
can have
sure
some,
we could put something, but
we got some
A yoga
limitations in there
studio,
somewhere.
Can we tie like more of the, I could see the small storefront style being the desire, that's what I think we're all picturing. And
Yeah.
we're gonna get the warehouse.
Mhm.
So I was just curious, is there a way we can tie a percentage of, like, you need to do X amount of small storefront first, that has to be part of the zone? Because I could see this being a way, if that'll be in the future, I'm just getting I wanna get my rental property.
When I look at this site,
Yeah.
the small storefront seems like it would work up here really well. Because this is a space of property that isn't being developed, but would be part of the deal. So maybe you could have some parking and one row of small storefront here. Then you have the incubator space, and then you have the storage for those units, and then a general storage unit. It's all uses on one site. So, yeah, it's something to definitely consider, and as we bring it through, we'll definitely look at trying to wordsmith something that requires amounts that make sense. Maybe because if they put a gate up and block access back into here, maybe those ones are the public access, public front, and then.
One of the other advantages of creating a zoning district is that we're not impacting anything else, right? We only get to assign this district where we want it.
And you can limit it,
Yeah.
quantify it, and.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the way we're working is, we know this site is one that's a very good candidate, so we're kind of writing the code for this site. And we're gonna think about other sites as we do it, but if someone comes in and wants to do another site, we might have to crack the code open then, again, to see, make sure it works right.
Yeah.
One thing about the point earlier, though, is with that high occupancy type concept, is I could see, let's say they put their storefront up on that one road up there. Let's say it is like a karate dojo or something. You can pack 20 kids into a karate dojo that's 1,000 square feet pretty easily, and then you start seeing parents parking in the neighborhood adjacent.
Yeah.
And that's what you don't want to see, especially those neighborhoods that are really tight already.
We'll give them coupons for the bar.
Yeah, that's what you'd have, yeah, seriously, right?
So I think it's pretty clear we can get some uses, and uses can be either conditional or not permitted.
Right, cool.
Those types. Because conditional, you could deny it.
Sure.
If they didn't have the required parking. There's only 2 stalls per storefront, and they need 10. There's no way it's gonna happen.
Yes, that's the other thing to keep in mind is having the zone, it's not applied anywhere, right? It's a legislative thing they have to apply for, it comes to you all, and then would have to come to us to actually apply that zone somewhere. Just having it there doesn't mean that anybody automatically gets it.
So architecture, things that we've talked about there are enhancing the storefront so that it is obvious when you pull up that that's where you go into the business. You don't have to go hunt around and try to find where to get in. Using materials that are cost effective, and so we're gonna try to work through that. And maybe it's not the 60% brick and stone, but maybe there's some other things that are allowed to help the cost stay down but still look good. Parking, we've talked about maybe 2 stalls per storefront, and then maybe I do try to say, I don't know exactly the answer to that, but parking is going to be focused on 2 different things, the public space where the storefront is, and then actually getting into the back, how's that going to work? One example from some CCNRs we had where if there's a delivery truck, they can park behind the roll-up doors, but it has to be, the vehicle has to be attended while it's there, and then they can unload or do whatever, and then they can leave, so there's things like that, so. Parking's gonna definitely be a challenge if we don't get the uses right. Landscaping is another one. If there are spots around in the back here, there's gonna be a lot of truck traffic, so having landscaped islands and stuff is gonna be kinda hard to have in there. So we're gonna have to contemplate where the landscaping goes, where it makes sense. And one other thing we've talked about is if you do have storefronts and you're on a collector road or an arterial, being allowed to push those storefronts up to 10 feet off the back sidewalk instead of keeping the 20-foot buffer that we currently have. So that you can put the storefront, have the pedestrian access, parking on the side or something. Things to consider.
For parking, back on parking, are you gonna address parking for, like I've seen a lot of glass businesses that's where they go cut all the glass and all the employees park right behind the warehouse? And that blocks deliveries and stuff like that. So we need to make sure we're addressing parking of those using the actual spaces. Even if they don't have a storefront, they still have to have parking
employees
for their employees, because I've seen that really impact some of those areas. And in the larger C2 zones, you have a lot bigger alleys, so you have way more flexibility. These, I can see it being
Really tight.
So yeah, 2 stalls per storefront, and then maybe figuring out wherever we can stick parking for employees. And the setbacks was another thing, that's what I kind of talked about, setback and landscaping along collectors and arterials. Height, the main thing that I'd had in the draft and the staff report for height was if you're next to, I was thinking about the one side right here, if you're next to the 2 roads and your adjacent property has a perceived elevation that's lower than what it really is, then it's allowed. You just can't put the really tall stuff next to residential or next to existing businesses. So something to think about there. We'll try to do our best to tackle that in text. And then the uses, just considering noises and smells and parking. Any other thoughts on any of this stuff as we're collecting ideas to craft the code?
Are there spaces like this in our neighboring cities?
I've seen a few things. Draper or
West Jordan. West Valley has some.
I think we've talked about this a little bit with the planning commission. One of our significant struggles is we don't have older spaces in our community that are experiencing a reuse. That's where you have typically maybe somebody who's looking for a more affordable space to move into. And so a lot of communities might not have this kind of product, but they have other things that are kind of like tired commercial properties that are already kind of not, not a premium. So you're right. We're probably introducing something that some of the other communities might not have, but they also don't have. I mean, we're just bright and shiny. We're the shiny penny, and we just don't have anything like this. So.
Yeah, that's pretty much what we have. So I got some good information. Sandra, did you have any other items? Planning, did you?
No, I'm really excited about this.
So I think the path forward is putting together a sample code, and then I think we'll bring it, I don't know if we go to the council first or planning commission first. Put together a sample code, bring it to the planning commission, finesse it, and then get it to the city council. This is a typical process. And we're hoping to do that within the next couple of months. So the planning commission will probably see this probably early June. And then city council, if that goes well, late June, early July. Okay.
Recycle.
That was more than 5 minutes.
Sorry. All righty.
Thank you. Okay, thank you everybody for being here tonight. Good to meet your families. Again, planning, thank you for what you do. Really appreciate what you do. Hope you see you often enough. Last me, I guess. We did, apparently.
I was like, what?
See you more often.
Wow.
See you in a year.
Agreed.
Bring the pizza. I said it's not. I said if we need to see you more often.
Yeah, agreed.
Shots fired.
CDC will be up in 2 years. So start getting ready. This year. Start getting ready. Look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.